For more than 2 centuries, one sound haunted the coastlines of Europe. The snap of sails on the horizon. To many villagers, that sound meant everything was already lost. Their homes, their families, even their freedom. Between the 1500s and 1800s, hundreds of thousands of Europeans were captured, shipped across the sea, and enslaved in North Africa. This is the forgotten story of the Europeans who lived and died in African slavery. A chapter history rarely speaks about, but one we cannot ignore. When the word slavery comes to mind, most people think of one era, the Atlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans taken to the Americas, a brutal, devastating history that reshaped the world. But what if I told you that during this same era, another slave trade was thriving, one that operated in reverse? One where Europeans were the ones taken, chained, bought, and sold? From the shores of Italy and Spain to the cold villages of Iceland, entire communities lived in fear of a different kind of slave raid, one carried out by the Barbary states of North Africa. To understand how Europeans were enslaved in Africa, we must begin in the Mediterranean, specifically in the powerful coastal states of Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, and Morocco. These regions, often called the Barbary states, were ruled by local dynasties and influenced at times by the Ottoman Empire. Their economies were built on 3 pillars: trade, taxation, and piracy. Piracy, or privateering as it was legally framed, was not the chaotic, lawless activity we imagine from movies. It was a well-organized business. Corsair ships operated with state approval, their missions were planned, their profits were taxed, their captives were registered, valued, and sold like currency, and Europeans were among the most prized captives. The first and most terrifying method of capture was the sudden coastal raid. Corsair ships would appear at night or in the early dawn, slipping silently toward vulnerable towns. With speed and precision, they stormed beaches, smashed doors, and seized whoever they could. Portugal, Spain, Italy, France, and the islands of the Mediterranean were frequent targets, but the raids spread far beyond the warm sea. By the 1600s, the corsairs struck as far as Ireland, England, Denmark, and Norway, and even Iceland, a place many believed to be too remote ever to be attacked. One of the most chilling raids occurred in 1627, when corsairs reached the Icelandic coast. They overwhelmed 2 villages and captured nearly 400 people. Most never made it home. But the largest source of captives wasn't land. It was the sea. Sailors were prime targets. Merchant ships, fishing boats, and even small trading vessels were vulnerable. Once a European ship was overtaken, its crew was stripped, bound, and shipped to North African port cities, where their fate was decided. The idea that North African raiders reached as far as the shores of the British Isles shocks many people today. But at the time, Europe's naval power was fragmented. Many coastal regions were unprotected. A well-armed corsair ship could outrun, outgun, and outmaneuver most European vessels. For the captured, the journey across the Mediterranean was only the beginning. When they arrived in places like Algiers, Tunis, or Sale, they were marched through crowded ports into a world both vibrant and terrifying. Some captives were purchased immediately at public auctions. Others were delivered to state officials. Every person was assessed for value, their age, skill, strength, nationality, even their perceived ransom potential. Europeans with wealthy families or connections were often reserved for ransom. Poor fishermen, widows, children had far fewer chances. The harshest fate for male captives was the galleys, enormous warships that required dozens of rowers chained to heavy oars. Galley slaves rowed for up to 16 hours a day, under burning sun or freezing night winds. Disease, exhaustion, and malnutrition killed many within months. Yet the demand never slowed. Every battle, every voyage claimed more lives. Women and children were often taken into domestic service. Some served in wealthy households, preparing food, cleaning, or caring for children. Treatment varied widely. Some captives lived stable lives, while others faced abuse or were forced into concubinage. If a European captive possessed a valuable trade, carpentry, metalwork, navigation, medicine, they could be assigned special duties. These individuals sometimes earned partial freedoms and, in rare cases, could negotiate their own release. Most male captives lived in large stone barracks called bagnios, overcrowded, noisy, and heavily policed. Hundreds slept side by side. During the day, they labored in shipyards, fortifications, or local industries. At night, guards locked the heavy iron doors. Within these walls, a hidden world formed. Secret Christian masses, underground markets, coded messages, forged letters, and even escape tunnels. Few succeeded. Most were caught. Punishments were severe. One of the reasons European slavery in North Africa lasted so long was that it wasn't just cruelty, it was business. Ransom was one of the most profitable industries in the Barbary world. Church organizations in Europe raised money. Families mortgaged their homes. Kings sent envoys carrying chests of gold. Negotiators known as redeemers traveled across the sea to bargain for lives. But the system was slow, expensive, and often corrupt. Wealthier captives were freed first. Poorer ones waited, sometimes for decades, sometimes until death. By the late 1600s and 1700s, panic spread along Europe's coastlines. Entire regions built watchtowers, alarm systems, and coastal fortifications. Fishermen refused to sail without armed escorts. Villagers relocated further inland. And still, the raids continued. It wasn't until the early 1800s, when Europe's military power grew dramatically, that things began to change. The United States fought the First Barbary War in 1801. Britain launched heavy naval strikes on Algiers in 1816. European powers demanded the end of Christian slavery. By the 1830s, after France invaded Algeria, the corsair system finally collapsed. Historians estimate that between 600,000 and more than 1 million Europeans were enslaved in North Africa between 1500 and 1800. Exact numbers are impossible, but the scale was unquestionably massive. Entire villages disappear from records. Church archives list hundreds of missing fishermen. Personal diaries, like that of Icelandic captive Ólafur Egilsson, describe events that sound like scenes from another world, yet they were all too real. So why do so few people know this story today? Several reasons. First, Europe became dominant later. Narratives of Europeans as victims faded as their global power grew. Second, the Atlantic slave trade, far larger and more systematic, overshadowed the memory of European captivity. Third, many captives never returned home, leaving few written testimonies. And finally, this history doesn't fit easily into modern discussions. But history is not a simple story of good versus evil. It is a story of shifting power and what people do with that power. For centuries, European villagers lived in fear of the horizon. A single ship could erase an entire community. Families were separated, lives uprooted, and faith tested. This is a chapter of history, not about guilt or blame, but about remembering. Because the story of Europeans enslaved in Africa reminds us of something essential. Slavery has taken many forms. It has moved in every direction. It has touched every corner of the world, and understanding that truth brings us closer to understanding each other. This is the forgotten story of the Europeans enslaved in Africa, a part of our shared human past that deserves to be heard.